The old Riverside Diner had been serving the community for over 40 years. Its red vinyl booths and checkered floors held the memories of countless family meals, first dates, and quiet conversations over coffee. On this particular Saturday afternoon, the autumn sun streamed through the wide windows, casting warm light across the familiar scene. Emma Rodriguez sat at her usual corner booth, her textbooks spread across the table as she worked on her college assignments. At 19, she had the kind of gentle spirit that drew people in. Her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, her eyes bright with determination despite the challenges life had handed her. The wheelchair beside her booth was simply part of who she was, a result of a car accident 3 years earlier that had changed her life, but never dimmed her hopes of becoming a teacher. Emma loved coming to the diner on weekends. The staff had known her since she was little, and there was something comforting about the familiar hum of conversation and the gentle clatter of dishes. She could study here in peace, surrounded by the warmth of a place that felt like home. But today, that peace was about to be shattered. A group of college boys had been sitting across the diner for the past hour, their voices growing louder with each passing minute. They were the kind of young men who mistook cruelty for comedy, who had never learned that true strength comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down. As Emma reached for her water glass, her arm caught the edge of her notebook, sending it tumbling to the floor. It was a simple accident, the kind that happens to everyone. But as she maneuvered her wheelchair to retrieve it, one of the boys called out in a mocking voice, "Need some help there, Wheels?" His friends erupted in laughter, and Emma's cheeks flushed red. She'd heard worse before, but it never stopped hurting. The cruelty of strangers always felt like a fresh wound, no matter how many times it happened. "Just ignore them, honey," whispered Ruth, the elderly waitress who had been working at the diner for over 20 years. She bent down to help Emma retrieve her notebook, her own face tight with disapproval. But the boys weren't finished. As Emma tried to focus on her studies, they began making exaggerated gestures, pretending to stumble and fall, laughing at their own cruel performance. Other diners shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one spoke up. Then one of them, a boy with an expensive jacket and an ugly smirk, walked over to Emma's table. Without warning, he knocked her textbook to the floor and gave her shoulder a sharp slap. "Oops," he said with mock innocence. "Guess you're not the only clumsy one here." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she held them back. She'd learned long ago that showing pain only encouraged bullies. Ruth rushed over, her face flushed with anger. "You boys need to leave, right now." But they just laughed, their leader puffing out his chest. "What are you going to do about it, Grandma?" The diner fell silent. Even the kitchen sounds seemed to pause. Emma sat frozen, feeling smaller than she ever had before. This was supposed to be her safe place, her refuge from a world that could be so needlessly cruel. Then, through the autumn air, came the deep rumble of motorcycles. The sound grew closer. A dozen powerful engines that seemed to make the windows vibrate. The boys at the table looked toward the parking lot, their bravado flickering just slightly. The door chimed as it opened, and in walked a sight that made everyone in the diner take notice. 12 members of the Iron Angels Motorcycle Club filed in quietly, leather vests over their shoulders, patches telling stories of brotherhood and service. They were men who had seen enough of life to understand what really mattered. Leading them was Marcus Thompson, a man whose graying beard and weathered face spoke of wisdom earned through experience. At 58, he'd been riding for over 30 years, and his club had a reputation not for trouble, but for protection. They were fathers, grandfathers, veterans, men who understood that true strength meant standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. Marcus's eyes swept the diner, taking in the scene with the practiced awareness of someone who'd learned to read situations quickly. He saw Emma still sitting quietly at her table with tears threatening to spill. He saw the boys, suddenly much less confident now that they weren't the biggest presence in the room. "Afternoon, folks," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying the kind of authority that didn't need to be raised. "Heard there might be some trouble in here." Ruth stepped forward, her chin raised with newfound courage. "These boys have been bothering Emma, making fun of her disability and putting their hands on her." Marcus nodded slowly, then walked over to Emma's table. But instead of confrontation, he did something unexpected. He knelt down beside her wheelchair, bringing himself to her eye level. "You okay, sweetheart?" he asked gently, his voice soft enough that only she could hear. Emma managed a small nod, surprised by the kindness in his voice. "What's your name?" "Emma," she whispered. "Emma, that's a beautiful name." "I'm Marcus, and these are my friends." He gestured to the other bikers who had arranged themselves quietly around the diner. "We heard someone was giving you a hard time, and we don't much care for that sort of thing." Then Marcus stood and turned to face the group of boys. His voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath it. "Now I'm thinking you young men made a mistake. Maybe you thought it was funny to pick on someone you saw as different, someone you thought couldn't defend herself." The boys shuffled nervously. Their leader tried to maintain his swagger, but his voice cracked slightly as he spoke. "We weren't doing anything wrong, old man." Marcus smiled, but it wasn't a warm expression. "Son, I've got a daughter about your age. And if I ever heard that someone treated her the way you treated this young lady, well, let's just say I'd want to have a conversation about respect." One of the other bikers, a man named Tommy who worked as a mechanic and coached Little League on weekends, stepped forward. "See, we believe in treating people right, especially people who deserve our protection, not our cruelty." The atmosphere in the diner had completely shifted. What had felt threatening and unsafe now felt protected, wrapped in the quiet strength of men who had chosen to use their presence for good. Marcus pulled out his wallet and placed a $50 bill on Emma's table. "This is for your books, sweetheart. You keep studying hard. The world needs teachers like you're going to be." Emma's eyes widened. She'd never told anyone in the diner about her dream of teaching. "How did you—" Marcus smiled, and this time it was genuinely warm. "My wife's a teacher. I know that look. The look of someone who's going to spend her life helping others learn and grow. Don't let anybody make you think you can't do anything you set your mind to." The leader of the boys tried one more time to save face. "Come on, guys, let's get out of here. This place is lame anyway." But Marcus stepped into their path. "Not quite yet, son. First, I think you owe the young lady an apology, a real one." The boy looked around, realizing that every eye in the diner was on him. The other patrons, emboldened by the biker's presence, were no longer looking away. Some had even pulled out their phones. I'm sorry," he mumbled toward Emma. "Look at her when you say it," Marcus instructed quietly, "and mean it." The boy turned toward Emma, his face red with embarrassment. "I'm sorry. What I did was wrong," Emma nodded graciously, showing more class in her forgiveness than he had shown in his cruelty. As the group of boys filed out of the diner, their heads hanging low, the atmosphere lightened considerably. The bikers settled into various booths around the restaurant, ordering coffee and pie like any other group of friends out for an afternoon ride. Marcus remained at Emma's table for a few more minutes, asking about her studies and sharing stories about his daughter, who was studying to be a nurse. The other bikers waved and smiled at Emma, making her feel like she was surrounded by a dozen protective big brothers. Before they left, Marcus handed Emma a business card. "That's got my number on it," he said. "If anyone ever gives you trouble again, anywhere, anytime, you call us. We might not look like your typical guardian angels, but that's exactly what we are." As the rumble of their motorcycles faded into the distance, Emma looked around the diner. The other customers were smiling at her now, some coming over to check on her and express their admiration for her grace under pressure. Ruth brought her a fresh cup of hot chocolate, refusing to let her pay for it. "Those boys! They reminded me that there are still real men in this world," she said, her eyes misty. "Men who understand that we're all in this together." Emma returned to her textbooks, but her heart felt lighter than it had in a long time. She'd been reminded that for every person in the world who chose cruelty, there were others who chose kindness. For every voice that sought to tear down, there were voices ready to build up. And sometimes, those voices came roaring in on motorcycles, wearing leather and carrying hearts full of compassion. From that day forward, whenever Emma came to study at the diner, she noticed something different. People were kinder. Not just to her, but to everyone. It was as if the bikers' act of protection had reminded the whole community what it meant to look out for one another. And on quiet weekend afternoons, When the sun slanted through the diner windows just right, Emma would sometimes hear the distant rumble of motorcycles and smile, knowing that somewhere out there, her guardian angels were still riding, still protecting, still proving that true strength comes not from putting others down, but from lifting them up.